All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Fullcast Fireside Chat. I'm your host, Tyler Simons, Head of Customer Success at Fullcast, and we are a go-to-market planning and execution platform. Today, our topic, collaborating with global teams. And our guest is Jamie Klanac, and I'll go ahead and turn the mic over to you to give yourself a little intro, and then we'll jump right in.
Okay, great. No, thank you, Tyler, and thank you, Fullcast IO team. Yes, I am Jamie Klanac, and I was with IBM for a very long time where I held revenue operations leadership roles in global, in North America, Latin America, and then lived 4 years in Asia where I spent 2 years in Tokyo, 2 years in Beijing, running basically billion-dollar segments of IBM's business and about 1,000 reps in each of those geographies. I most recently was with a company here that brought me to Tampa that I left, and I will be starting a new role on Monday. And so I'm delighted to be here.
Woo, congratulations. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, you and I had some discussions early on, and we really kind of just honed in on this culture aspect. And I think it's a little bit different than what a lot of people think about when they talk about revenue operations and sales ops. And I think it's a really important thing to cover. So, and you've seen it, right? Like you've been in different areas and you've lived there. And so you've seen these different maybe culture aspects and how it might specifically like impact operations. So I'm curious from your perspective and your experience as it relates to like org design and as you go to build out like revenue operations. As you go to build out revenue operations structures, and you have like, let's say, sales teams and things like that, as it relates to like org design and things like that, what are the what's the different types of culture there?
Yeah. So we probably hit the org design and the go-to-market and that, but I think the overlaying structure or the culture is a big deal. And I mean, this isn't necessarily just for revenue operations. It's all, going to a new culture in a foreign land, 8,000 miles from my home. And so I went. My first role was in Tokyo, and it was after the tsunami, and so there was still recovery and that kind of thing that was going on. And one of the things, just of going into an office and people that have worked in Tokyo, how quiet the office environment is. And as an American, Latin American, it was much different. I had another our marketing director was from the U.S. and then everybody else was Japanese, and so we were a little too loud in the office. But I mean, Thursday at 3 o'clock, it would be very quiet. That means that they were working very hard. Not all of those things. It just wasn't the chatter or the things that you're used to in a U.S. Office or Western office. But one of the big things that culturally that is a big deal, in business in Japan is a thing called communication. So nomu means to drink, and you got the rest of communication. So communication was a big deal. Was you going out after work and sitting down with colleagues. I mean, your team or your management and hanging out and talking, and not necessarily about business, but getting that relationship. So that's where a lot of the networking, and it was penalty free. So contrasting that with the office environment of how quiet it was, in a normal business day, wide open, a lot of fun. Happy hour starts at 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And I'll talk a little bit about the work day, but it was a lot of fun. Ate a lot of awesome food, things that you never heard of that I put in my mouth, and nothing goes to waste. And so one of the other things too that coming from the U.S. and having been business casual for a long time is in Tokyo you wear a suit. Our customers wear suits. And so that was something that was a little different, was putting on the old tie, but it was, part of the culture. From July to September, it is very, very hot in Tokyo, especially the land of the rising sun. So I would go catch the train, the subway early in the morning, 6 o'clock. It'd be like noon, very hot. And so they had what they call cool biz, so you could go, wear your suit but without a tie from July to October.
So is this, by the way, does this count as a suit? I'm just like thinking about the difference, right?
Yeah,
I'm in the Pacific Northwest, and we have a
yeah.
very different, I'm wearing a jacket. I mean, it is snowing outside, but I'm like, this is my business suit, and very different in terms of just what is expected in terms of attire, and the contrast between the two places.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, so you would
Yeah.
not be
No,
in
I would look,
in the uniform, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, and then the day, I mean, so the day would typically start around 9 o'clock, and then they always stopped for lunch, and we had an awesome cafeteria where it was all of the Japanese food, everything that you would think. Any Japanese restaurant, awesome. And so you had lunch, and then you would work, and then typically, I mean, there was even dinner served at night. So it was kind of a elongated day. And um, and then one of the things too, just culturally, is that, and I find myself doing this. A lot of times, employees would stay until the manager left. So
Yeah.
sometimes I had to do a head fake and leave and come back, because a lot of them would just stay there. And sometimes it was a personal choice, because I mean, a lot of times the offices were nice. You had high-speed internet. You had everything you needed right there, and so that was just part of the culture. But yeah, what wonderful, wonderful people. And then when I went to Beijing, a little bit different. When I went there, was more of a millennial team, more women that I had on my team. Very similar in, not as, is going out as much. It wasn't the communication, but we did have the team parties and dinners and things, and everything's on a lazy Susan, and so that was always delightful.
It's very interesting. Now, as we think about, like, maybe the RevOps team is based here in the US, and they're starting to expand into Japan, China, anywhere really in APAC. And, what are some of the things they might need to think about culture-wise that would change how they would want to structure their go-to-market, or, maybe comp plans or things like that?
So not much different. I mean, and so you have to remember that, the revenue ops, the tasks that we were doing were very revenue ops. It was marketing. It was all the go to market. It's pipeline. It's forecasting. It was commissions. It was all of those things. So not much different in terms of that. But it is pulling it together, and I think that. I think it's probably similar to the way we're going through it right now in the U.S., where that makes sense to knock down those silos and bring everybody together. And that's, believe it or not, early on, and this has been a few years back, that's what we try to do. One of the things that I found outside the U.S. that was different, particularly in China, and I spent some time in Latin America, was really the partner channel. IBM is a big brand name, but it was, you want to buy locally,
Yeah.
and so and who and so that was a big deal, was having that partner channel, and the whole thing, the whole ecosystem that went along with it.
That's super important, right? Like, you have to know when you're entering a market that there's going to be certain ways to go to market. And depending on what the culture is, and to your point with LATAM, when IBM started to roll out there, like, they needed partners because it was a buy local type of thing. And it might be different in Japan, or Australia, China, etc. And those are the things you need to think about. Go ahead.
No, you're
Oh,
absolutely right. The
okay.
partner. So it's the other piece of it is the routes to market, right? So and I think you kind of bring up a point, particularly in Latin America, where as I remember, it was like some really low percentage of people had telephones, but at some point everybody had laptops and internet. So they kind of leapfrogged and got into this digital market kind of ahead of everybody. So they were behind in terms of inside tele sales, whatever you want to call it. And so that's kind of an interesting thing that I saw unfold. And I saw some of that happen in Asia as well.
Yeah. Is there anything that anybody now? We talked a little bit about having teams here in the U.S. and working as you start to go into this global expansion. Are there anything else that people might need to think about as they go into global expansion, and whether that's into APAC or EMEA?
Yeah. So one of the things that going in again, I was this wasn't on my bucket list. I showed up. I'd been to Asia traveling, but living there was much different. Coming in was having huge metropolitan areas like Tokyo or in Beijing. They did have geo expansion. So you'd go South China or somewhere out in Japan where you didn't have the critical mass of people, and still trying to do some face-to-face business, still trying to the IBM software portfolio is huge. So being knowing everything or having that or that very specific brand knowledge, having that domain expertise didn't always translate when you got outside of those metropolitan areas. And so you had to have a coverage model that was nimble enough. Hey, we have people that are sitting there that can, smart people, but we may have to have a model where we fly people in. And it could be globally, it could be from, the metropolitan areas, that kind of
thing. Yeah. What were some of the coverage models that you saw that worked really well?
So, all right. So if you think about 1,000 reps, right, in Japan,
Yeah.
and then about the same in Beijing, in China, Greater China, which includes Taiwan and Hong Kong, we had inside sales, right? So you had, depending on, and it was segmented SMB, mid-market kinds of coverage. We had face-to-face, where we had client relationship, people that were, out there with the customers. You had, like I said, these brand specialists that were very domain experts that, and then you had portfolio reps too that kind of knew, it could be a specific product that has a lot of different, SKUs and things, and you have to kind of know that. So, and then you had partners that you could bring in, and so the go to market, and then we did have the segmentation of the SMB, mid market, and we had named accounts, which IBM called integrated accounts, and these were $100 million accounts. We did have some headquarter like Bank of China in Beijing, some of the big banks. We had Toyota, et cetera, in Japan. And so, so it's similar, but all the above.
Yeah. Did you see any differences between I'm going to focus on Japan and China just because I just want to see if we can really tease out some of the differences between the two go-to-markets and what would have been maybe successful in Japan, but if you tried to do that in China, it wouldn't have worked, or vice versa.
Good point. Right. Two totally different. And so one of the things in Japan is that they have what they call when they go through. It's really when you're talking about account-based marketing or account-based experience and who are all the influencers. Well, that is exactly what happens in the buyer groups, and they go through this thing called the Ringi process, where they get consensus, and that's a big deal in Japan. So that'd be a lot of times when we would hear about deals, hey, they're in Ringi, which, okay, that's good, meaning it's a go no go kind of a thing. Yep. And then one of the things too is that they're very and I'll kind of touch on the holidays because it really matters, the difference between. So you have in Japan, you have Golden Week, which is typically in May, right? Let me back up. There's a week in the beginning of the year and they don't really celebrate Christmas. So it's a few days after Christmas, all the way through that first week, everything shuts down. Customers, everybody shut down in Japan. So you kind of get your New Year resolution. Then you get into May where you have their golden week, which is a big deal.
Yep.
And so everything it's almost like they do a lot of things in mass, meaning that people wait, they're off that week, they take, everybody's on vacation, golden week, and then people do take vacations, but it's kind of scheduled. And then the whole fiscal year ends March 31st for the government of Japan, and so you have to kind of deal with that. You go to China, and it's a little bit different. They don't have the ringy process, a little more Western. And oh, by the way, much more partner centric was my experience there. And it was, similarly where it was relationship and going through the whole process. And they have their Chinese New Year, which is typically end of January, February, and everybody takes off, and that's a big deal. And then they have their golden week is like in October. Yeah. And everybody takes off, and so you kind of everything's in between there. But similarities: Tokyo very crowded, Beijing very very crowded with people, and so those are some of the things that you deal with. Is that I just got used to crowds, and just one little quick story: when I came back from China, literally had been back a week. I was in Manhattan. And I was thinking about how peaceful Manhattan was when I was walking down the street. So you get the idea, right?
Yeah. That's I can imagine. I spent some time in Vietnam, and when we came back, it was very quiet. There's a lot less horns and stuff like that, and
oh yeah,
just reverse culture shock, I think is what they call it. What about let's say you've grown, you've expanded globally, mm-hmm. and you now have an ops team in EMEA, you have an ops team somewhere in Australia covering, let's say, Asia Pacific, or maybe there's an ops team in Japan. How do you think about these ops teams collaborating with each other, like dealing with time zones and maybe different ways of working? Like what would you see that was successful, and maybe like in the IBM days, like you collaborating back with the US and having those conversations? What are some things that worked really well?
So and that is an excellent point. So before I went to Asia, never really thought about time that much. And what I found when I was in Asia that 7 a.m. calls would be 14 hours later would make it starting at 9 p.m. right? Depending on the time of year, it's 13, 14 hours Tokyo, 12 to 13 in Beijing. And so never really thought about it. But then when I got there, you start realizing that, hey, Japan's not the 53rd state, that it is different. And so, hey, Jamie, let's have a call first thing Friday morning at 7 a.m. Okay, I'll be in the pub. It's 9 p.m. in Tokyo. Well, or how about this? Why don't we wait till 7 p.m. your time, and I'll talk to you by Saturday morning. But you get the idea here. Is
yeah.
The empathy of the time and understanding that not everything is on New York time, and so that is a big deal. I think that just to make sure that you share it, and a lot of times, and you'll never hear anybody complain. I've had colleagues. I've taken the calls on the Friday night, midnight calls, kind of thing. But it's just something to think about when you're scheduling time. And it was always back and forth. And my global team was really good about those kinds of things too, where they were back and forth. Now, to answer your question, so I was in global roles, but the last role I was in IBM was, we had 7 geographies at the time. I think they've changed. And so you think about the matrix in a company that large, and this happens, in these big Fortune 500s, and then some of these, some of the guys we're talking to now are in startups and could eventually happen, is that you've got this matrix management thing. So I had 7 operations managers out, in the geographies. I had an immediate staff, global staff, and then I had a boss, but they have an operations boss, but they also have the sales leader or marketing leader that, within the geography. And
Yep.
so you have to understand all of those things. You can't, just think you're the only game in town. And so it's a lot of collaboration, and I think it's understanding and it's empathy, and then it's also working. So it's complicated if you let it manage you. Communication's huge with all the above, with the management team, with the ops colleague, all of those things.
Yeah. What about like just working on just like, I really thought it was interesting when you were talking about Japan and kind of this after work get together type stuff. And it sounds like maybe a lot of work actually gets done then potentially. Or is that just more of like a hanging out type of thing?
I think not a lot of business gets done. Like, we're not going to sit down and go,
Okay.
"Oh my God, it is," but it's a trust thing, and I think
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
it's the networking. It's, hey, we had this conversation. I saw you last night. We both wake up with a headache tomorrow, but we're in it together, kind of a thing. And I think that is the byproduct of communication, and look, I've got the proof here of 3 or 4 nights a week with that, and it's something that I've never ever I will remember for the rest of my life, and it was just a fantastic experience. Just love most awesome people you ever want to meet.
Yeah. And I bring that up because I think that's that I'm really honing in on here, is that as you have these teams that are distributed globally, not only do you have to be sensitive of time zone stuff, which I'm awful at because I'm like very specific. I like to go to bed at like 8:30. So it's the essentially the traditional ways of working or your work mentalities, and to think about like just in the specific example of Japan, building that trust across like oceans becomes really critical in thinking about how to do that. And it might be different for China, it might be different for Australia to either build trust or rapport so that you can collaborate more closely. And I think that's going to be really important as your teams are trying to figure out like, well, this is what we're going to do in the US, and this is how that's going to tie in with our business in EMEA. And we need to be talking. We can't just be siloed and you're going to go do whatever you're going to do and I'm going to go do whatever I'm going to do. I don't know that that's best for the business.
No, there just on that point, there's a hunger and it probably still is now, is to be global and be more collaborative. I mean, if you think about it, Japan's this island, and China, the GCG, they do have a hunger to collaborate. Between the two, I was involved in calls both. We did some outsourcing and things, and so a lot of that, but also with their EMEA and US partners, and understand the global, how to go global. And by the way, their customers want that too. Sony wants that. The big banks in China want that, in terms of understanding how this all fits together and getting the best of breed, best of process, learning and collaborating. And that's why the networking is so huge now, to collaborate globally.
Yeah. What about some things to avoid? You're expanding globally, building teams. What are some assumptions that maybe we make that should be avoided?
So I mean, look, and I probably made many of them that I didn't even realize I made.
Yeah.
There's things like, speaking too fast, for one, and I tend to do that. Slow down. And the other thing is things like, hey, cut it out, and they go, what? things that, or it just doesn't translate, or
Yeah.
you'll say something, and and then the other thing is listening skills. I found myself really, God bless them. I mean, trust me, their English is a lot better than my Japanese or Mandarin was. Trust me. And I have the utmost respect for many people that speak 2 and 3 and 4 languages, but being able to really listen and understand, and then there's sometimes, and then sometimes you don't understand, and so it takes a little bit longer on some of the conversations and that's not because of them, it's because of how I'm receiving, bringing it in, and then making sure that you're totally clear, that you're not, you're not being ambiguous in, the discussion, or assuming anything. And that's what I learned. And not initially, some of those things kind of got by me, but over time, you just had to kind of stop and make sure that you were communicating clearly.
COVID aside,
Mhm.
do you think it's a good idea for teammates to travel to these places? I'm a US based sales ops person. We've got a team in Japan. Do you think it's a good idea, maybe once a year, that everyone gets together in Japan or the US to just work together and collaborate and build those relationships?
So put COVID aside for a minute, or altogether, absolutely. I think that this is great. I love seeing you, Tyler. I can't wait for us to go have a Starbucks or something someday
Yeah.
in Seattle Bend or whatever. Uh, no, no, it's really important. What I found about myself, because I had worked remote for a number of years, and kind of like I felt like the Wizard of Oz. A lot of times we didn't have so much Zoom; it was over phone. When I got to Japan, I had the whole team there, and that's when I realized how much I love working in an office. And
Yeah.
same thing in Beijing. We didn't have everybody there, but there's nothing like it. And then when we brought in, people would come in, and that's probably where I met most of the IBM executives. I mean, I'd go to New York and never see them, but they would come in, and you got to see. And I just think it was so important. We had the CEO come in and speak, and I just think having that touch point, even as important or more important, are those immediate colleagues. It is the other sales ops, RevOps guys that you can collaborate, and then you get that lifetime connection that you don't always get through LinkedIn or Zoom.
Yeah, that makes sense. It looks like we're getting close on our 30 minutes here. I do sometimes I run over and I don't allow the guests to have a final parting thought. So I think one of the things that I have really taken from the conversation is that listening, thinking about where they're at, location, times, right? Like that's collaboration within your own RevOps structure, but also when you start to think about your go-to-market structure. So that's how are you going to roll out sales to the market? You've got to think about the kind of the cultural aspects and the traditional ways that they interact with each other or make buying decisions. And that might be at dinner, or it might be buy local, and so you might need a partner organization. So don't just assume that everyone's going to buy like the US does. Do your diligence and do the research. So Jamie, anything else that you think that is super important as we think about collaborating with teams globally, culture, anything else you want to leave us with?
I think you hit it. It's meeting our customers where they are, and our colleagues. But I mean, same thing happens in the U.S. There's small towns in Georgia or Mississippi that like to do business different than you would in Manhattan. Same thing happens in these other countries, and a lot of times they don't have the resources that um, there's a lot of those things. So absolutely. So it's just being empathetic, eyes open, and learning and listening. And I would advise anybody that reach out and touch our global friends, because you'll learn a lot. I have. Yeah.
Jamie, thank you so much for the time. Congrats on the new role.
Thank you.
You'll be super busy starting tomorrow, right? Or next week,
Monday.
Monday, starting
28th,
Monday.
yep.
So your last week of vacation.
Yep.
Again, appreciate it. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Cheers. Thank you.
Yep.
Good.
See ya.